SPED 2010 students, I hope everyone had a great spring break. So as you see here, I have our course syllabus calendar pulled up. I just wanted to kind of walk you through kind of what the next little bit look like so we kind of know where we are at and where we're going. So as you can see here, Monday, March 24th, this opens, and this module 7 is where we are working in at this moment. So we're doing module 7, which is planning instruction for all students. This is going to be a 2-week module. So it will open on March 24th and close on April the 6th. So you can see here, earlier in the semester, back in module 2, if you remember back that far, I know a lot of us have slept since then, but we were talking about what is UDL, what is Universal Design for Learning, how does it fit in this special education classroom? Well, now we're looking at how do we actually plan. So you did sort of a practice where you were getting activities and putting things in the UDL and looking at, how do you do representation. And well, now we're going to use all those things to put an actual lesson plan together. And when we're doing this lesson plan, we're going to be thinking about how we plan for all of our students, right? Going back to those UDL principles. You will also be completing an IRIS module on accommodations, right? So we're going to go over all of that, but I kind of wanted you to see that we are in a 2-week module, and then after that we will begin working on module 8, which goes into behavior, which is quite heavy. Even though it's 1 week, there's a lot that we'll be working on in that, and you'll have some reading in another book as well. So we'll do module 7 for 2 weeks, and then we will go into module 8. As you can see here, some upcoming things for you to be working on and focusing on. You, at this point, should have already submitted your course project, which was you should have completed either an interview with a parent who has a child with exceptional needs, or you picked the peer-reviewed article, or you were doing the work-based learning project with your reflection. So those things that you should have been doing. At this point, pretty much almost everyone is placed, exception of a couple of students. So you should be completing your journal entries. I have already had some mentor teachers email me or mail me the final evaluation and log. So that's one thing I did want to mention. Every time that you're going into the service learning classroom, you are to complete a journal entry. That journal entry you will use to complete your written analysis, right? So this is like your reflection paper. So those 2 assignments will be submitted to our course in eLearn. There's a Dropbox for them. You do not submit the final evaluation and your logged hours. That is something that the mentor teacher you are with will send to me. So I'm going to send a separate email out about that, reminding you to let your mentor teachers give me that information. Now, they could do it through email, or they can send it to Water State campus and mail it out that way, which we call it snail mail, but they could do it that way. But you do not need to submit those. Those are for your mentor teachers. Now, I've had people in the past have an envelope where it was sealed and a student dropped it off in my office. That's completely fine. It has to be sealed though. So those are your 3 options when getting your evaluation and log to me. So let's go ahead and get into Module 7. As I mentioned, Module 7 is Planning Instruction for All Learners, specifically focusing on UDL principles and outcome. So when we're looking at an overview, I want you to look at what our focus is. Our focus is we're going to read Chapter 8 in our textbook, right? We have some key words, which is our focus. There are 2 chapters that go along with this module, and the reason I added an extra chapter in there for you, and I know it's heavy, that's why you have 2 weeks to do it, is because when we talk about Chapter 8, it's really looking at how are you designing this lesson, right? The big idea is looking at your content standards. What are some essential questions? What are some modifications? Looking at those students who have IEPs or IFSPs. And then you also have to look at that behavior intervention support as well. Now, chapter 10 is going to really get into that. What does authentic learning look like? What does that mean? And we're going to connect that to our big ideas. And then we're going to look at strategies to implement, like, are we going to use cooperative learning or direct instruction? Are we using explicit instruction? All of these things go together when we're going to make and design our lesson plan. So both chapters are necessary. That's why I'm giving you 2 weeks to do it. So always look at the key terms because they are important. The standards here, we have the in-task teacher preparation standards. It actually covers quite a few in this module. We've got learner development, learning differences, planning for instruction, which is the focus of this module. Instructional strategies, also the focus, and then we even cover leadership and collaboration. Now, with our standards for exceptional children, we have quite a few as well. We have learner development and individual learning differences. We have learning environments, curricular content knowledge, instructional planning and strategies, and then collaboration. Okay, so quite a few standards are being met when we're thinking about this module 7. Okay, so getting into the resources here, you're going to see you obviously have your 2 chapters to read. You're going to read chapter 8 in your textbook and chapter 10, but even though that's a lot of reading, you do have 2 weeks to complete that, so keep that in mind. I always put the textbook chapter PowerPoints on there. I'm not a fan of that. I don't think it's a substitute for the book, obviously, but it just highlights some key things. So it's always a good study tool if you want to look at that. But they're there for you. So you have the PowerPoint for chapter 8 and 10, and then you have the outline for chapter 8 and 10. Remember, this is something that comes with a textbook from the publishing company. So this is something I didn't create. If it's additional one in there, I would put that out. But those are the ones there for you as learning resources. So you can see here, I do have a module for you to do. And the reason I chose this one specifically is because in chapter 8, you're going to be looking at some accommodations, right? And when you're designing a lesson plan, you need to think about accommodations or that IEP, that plan for that student. So I felt like if we're going to put together a plan using these UDL components, it's important for you to be able to look at the IRIS module, right? Specifically focusing on what are accommodations, what are some practices that get confused, right, with accommodations, which is different than what's in the IEP. So this would be more like a 504, section 504, when we're talking about accommodations. It's not necessarily an IEP, even though we need to look at that for those students. Some students don't have special ed services, but they can receive this accommodations. And these are things that need to be focused on when you're designing your lesson plan. Okay, so I thought it was important for you to be able to go through this IRIS module to make those connections. Now, for your actual assignment where I'm going to be assessing you is the lesson plan that you're going to be creating. I do have a lesson plan template here. A lot of students find this is a good one to use, and I'm going to be showing you an example. I have one from a prior class that I thought was really good and in-depth and thorough that I'm going to show you. That way you can get an idea of the expectations. But you can use this if you have something else you'd rather use. The only thing I caution you about is remembering it needs to be a UDL lesson plan, so it's going to look a little different than maybe what you're used to seeing in some of your other education courses. I do want to preface that. So when you click on the assignment, this is what it's going to say. Our main objective and focus for this is to create a lesson plan that incorporates UDL principles, right? So one of the things I want you to focus on is look at page 205 in your textbook, and I specifically want you to look at table 8.6, and it continues on to the very next page. Make sure that you're using this as a guide when you're creating it. Okay, so we want to create a lesson plan that covers our standards, but it's going to have these components of UDL. So if you're looking at table 8.6, you're going to see, right, that it's going to look at the UDL procedures and materials, but it's also going to like, what are some possible barriers that you need to be mindful of? You know, what are those UDL methods that I might want to use? So go back. You might even want to pull up your Module 2 assignment to see kind of what you did there. So here are your instructions. I'm not going to read through this for the sake of time of the video, but I give you guidelines. I guide you through it step by step. So read step by step. You have a scenario, which will be your focus, which is Liam, right? He's a 6th grader, and he's got ADHD, combined type. And you're going to create a lesson plan thinking about him, right? So consider the barriers, brainstorm, design the lesson. It has to be designed and tailored for your students, right? And we need to make sure the objectives and assessment, there's a clear alignment there, and that you have UDLs and you're addressing those potential barriers, right, as you're incorporating your lesson design. When you're planning your lesson design, even if you don't use my template, remember you do have to organize the lesson plan this way. I laid out exactly how I wanted it to be. So even if you don't use the template provided, it should be laid out this way. And one thing I did want to note too is for each stage, you are going to identify one UDL method to address these potential barriers to support Liam's needs. So even though you're making a lesson plan for the whole class, you're thinking about him and supporting him, as well as the classmates. That's why I said, please focus on that table 8.6 and really look at those first 2 columns. It's going to help you, okay? And then when you get through creating your lesson plan with all these components here, these 4 components I mentioned, I do want you to look at the focus of the assignment, right? So first you create your lesson plan. This is our focus. But we have to always evaluate and reflect upon what we're doing. Now, obviously, you didn't get to teach this lesson, but I still want reflection happening. So we need to self-evaluate, right? So there's a self-evaluation section here where we're going to focus on explaining how this addresses the scenario in number 3 with Liam, and then providing evidence from the textbook, which can come from table 8.6, right? And lastly, evaluate if you think it's going to enhance the teaching not only for Liam, but all your students, right? And you need to justify that. So here's an example of a 6th grade lesson in standards. And what I would suggest do is pulling up the Tennessee standards. That way you'll have them. This subject was reading. Obviously, I'm not going to tell you what subject matter. Maybe pick something that you really want to focus on. Math, writing, reading, science, social studies. I really will let you pick. However, you do need to look at the scenario, right, and Liam of your focus. Okay, so you'll see here, I will email this out as well, so you'll have this as an example. So for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through all of it. I'll just highlight some things. Assessment is an important part of a lesson. How are you going to assess that they met the standard or met the objective, right? The materials. And then you'll see here, even if you don't use the template I provided, you're going to see that each of those sections are in there that I asked for. And it's written in a way where you're looking at the same things that's in table 8.6. When you do a UDL lesson plan, not only do you list your procedures, but you're listing those barriers and what methods specifically from UDL are you going to use and focus on in each of these parts of the lesson. Your hook, how you grab their attention at the beginning, your whole group lesson, your guided practice, your independent, and then closing, evaluation, and assessment, right? And then at the bottom, it can still be one. I don't feel that there's a need to do 2 separate documents. You could just put your self-evaluation underneath your lesson plan. Some people like to separate it. I'll let you decide. You could do it just like this, and it would be fine. And you'll see here that they went ahead for each section of the lesson plan. They broke it out. They evaluated the anticipatory set. They evaluated the teacher input. They evaluated guided practice. So they evaluated each section. Some people chose to just do 2 or 3 paragraphs in paper form. I'm not really too particular. One thing I wanted to note, even though they did it this way, which is completely fine, I actually like this better, it's easier to grade, is that it makes sense. They went back and provided evidence and justifies for each of those sections in the evaluation right? And then they answered all of the prompts. Okay, so this is a really good example for you to go by. I will email this out. I do not want to see this exact thing on everyone else's. You may have some of the UDL methods, but it should not be the same reading lesson, the example I'm giving you. This is just to let you get an idea of what you need to be doing. All right, I know that's a lot. If you have questions and you're working on this and you need help, please reach out. You do have 2 weeks. This is a big assignment, and you do have the IRIS module to go along, and you have your Chapter 8 and Chapter 10. But when you're designing your lesson plan, focus on 8.6, but remember, take the content you've learned from both chapters when you're putting this together. All right, until next time, guys, take care.